The Genesis Institute pierced the Seattle skyline like a silver needle threading through clouds. Dr. James Harrison stood at his office window, watching sheets of rain blur the city into watercolors. 20 years of genetic research had earned him this view, along with a reputation as Earth's foremost expert in xenogenetic disorders. Yet lately, the view felt more like a prison than a reward. The soft chime of his office door interrupted his brooding. "Enter," he called, not turning from the window. The door whispered open, and the reflection in the glass made him freeze. A Luminian stood in his doorway, tall, willowy, with skin that seemed to capture and release light with each breath. Her silvery hair floated as if suspended in water, and bioluminescent patterns pulsed along her arms like gentle waves. Dr. Harrison. Her voice held the musical quality typical of her species, but underlying it was something he recognized all too well: desperation. "I am Naira Zather. I've traveled from the Luminian homeworld seeking your help." James turned, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit." He studied her as she moved, the grace typical of her species somehow brittle, as if she might shatter at any moment. "What brings you to Earth?" "My daughter, Lyra." Naira's hands trembled as she produced a holographic projector. A small Luminian child appeared above it, perhaps 6 or 7 by human standards. She spun slowly, laughing silently, her bioluminescence bright and joyful. This was 3 months ago. The image shifted. The same child lay in a medical pod, her once bright skin now dull and mottled, the beautiful patterns of light reduced to weak, erratic pulses. "And this is now." James leaned forward, professional curiosity warring with compassion. "The Fade," he said softly. "I've read about it, but never seen a case firsthand. It's extremely rare." "Yes." Naira's voice cracked. "Our healers say it's terminal. That I should prepare myself." Her hands clenched in her lap. "I refuse to accept that." James accessed his terminal, bringing up everything he knew about the condition. "The Fade affects your species' ability to process and store light energy. Without it, your cellular structures begin to break down. There's no known cure. But you've done impossible things before." Naira stood, moving around his desk with fluid grace. "Your work with cross-species genetic disorders is revolutionary. You saved the Andromedian ambassador's son when everyone else said it couldn't be done." "That was different," James protested, though her proximity made it hard to think clearly. "Luminians had a subtle, sweet scent like starlight given form. We had years of research to draw from. The Fade is barely understood, even by your own scientists. Then understand it." She knelt beside his chair, and he could see the fine tremors running through her luminescent form. "Please, I'll do anything. Participate in any trial. Pay any price. She's all I have." James looked away, his throat tight. "The Institute has protocols, approval processes. Even if I wanted to help, I couldn't just look at her." Naira's voice was barely a whisper. The hologram still spun between them, showing the child's deterioration in cruel detail. "Her name is Lyra. She loves to dance. She collects Earth music boxes because she says they sound like stars singing. She's only 7 cycles old, and she's dying." Her hand found his, sending a shock of static electricity through his skin. "Tell me your protocols are worth her life." James stared at their joined hands, hers glowing softly, his tan and calloused from years of work. He thought of all the rules he'd followed, all the careful steps up the career ladder. He thought of the view from his window, and how empty it suddenly seemed. "The Institute would never approve an experimental treatment," he said slowly, "not without years of preliminary research." "I understand." Naira began to withdraw her hand, defeat darkening her glow. But James continued, catching her fingers before they could slip away. "I have a private lab. Off the books. It's where I do my theoretical work." He shouldn't be telling her this. Everything about this situation screamed career suicide. "I can't promise anything. The Fade is incredibly complex, and time would be against us." Hope flickered across Naira's skin like aurora borealis. How much time? James studied the hologram, running calculations in his head. Based on her deterioration rate, 2 months. Maybe less. Then we have 2 months to do the impossible. Naira squared her shoulders, and James saw steel beneath her ethereal appearance. When do we begin? The smart thing would be to not begin at all. He stood, already knowing he was going to ignore his own advice. Meet me tonight. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks south. Harrison's. No connection to me, just coincidence. 9 p.m. Naira rose as well, her height bringing them almost eye to eye. Thank you, she breathed, and the gratitude in her voice made his chest ache. Don't thank me yet. He stepped back, needing distance to think clearly. I'm not sure I can help. I'm not sure anyone can. But you're willing to try. Her smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. Sometimes that's enough. After she left, James stood at his window for a long time, watching the rain. He thought about everything he was risking. His career, his reputation, possibly even his freedom if things went wrong. Then he thought about a little girl who collected music boxes because they sounded like singing stars, and he knew the choice had already been made. That night, as he gathered research materials and equipment from his private lab, he told himself he was doing this purely for scientific reasons. The fade was fascinating from a research perspective. A breakthrough could advance the field of xenogenetics by decades. This had nothing to do with the way Naira's hand had felt in his, or the desperate hope in her voice. He was still telling himself that when he walked into the coffee shop at precisely 9 p.m. and found her waiting, her glow dimmed to pass as human normal, but still beautiful enough to make his breath catch. Ready? She asked, standing. James thought of his comfortable office, his prestigious position, all the careful rules he'd followed to get there. Then he thought of Lyra, dancing in a hologram, her light already starting to fade. Ready, he replied, and stepped into the unknown. 2 weeks into their clandestine research, James found himself more fascinated by Naira's determination than the complex genetics they studied. She worked tirelessly, her luminescent patterns dimming with exhaustion, but her spirit unbroken. His private lab, hidden in an old industrial district, had become their sanctuary. The light absorption rate is still too low, Naira muttered, studying the holographic display of Lyra's cellular structure. Dark patches spread through the projection like ink in water. The treatments aren't working fast enough. James looked up from his own display, noting how Naira's own glow flickered with stress. You need to rest, he said softly. You've been at this for 16 hours straight. I'll rest when we find a cure. She adjusted something in the simulation, and the hologram shifted, showing new possibilities. Lyra had another episode yesterday. Her primary light core is down to 30% functionality. James moved to stand beside her, close enough to feel the static charge that always surrounded Luminians. Show me the latest readings. Their fingers brushed as she passed him the data crystal, and that familiar spark jumped between them. James had stopped pretending it was just static electricity days ago. Every touch, every shared look, every moment of connection was becoming harder to dismiss as purely professional. Look here, he said, focusing on the data. Her secondary cores are trying to compensate for the primary's failure. If we could find a way to boost their efficiency, we'd buy her more time. Naira leaned closer, her silver hair floating around them both. But the strain might accelerate the overall deterioration. Not if we introduce a stabilizing agent. James pulled up his research on human bioluminescent adaptation. There's a compound some deep-sea creatures use to maintain light production in extreme conditions. If we could modify it. That's forbidden technology, Naira whispered. Cross-species genetic modification is illegal in both our worlds. James met her gaze. Everything we're doing is illegal. Does that matter to you? You know it doesn't. Her hand found his again, deliberately this time. But it might matter to you. You're risking everything. Your career, your freedom. Why? The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. James thought about the proper, professional answer. Then he thought about the truth. Because the moment you walked into my office, everything changed. He squeezed her hand gently. Because your daughter deserves a chance to dance again. Because some things are worth risking everything for. Naira's glow brightened, patterns of light dancing across her skin in what he'd learned to recognize as emotion. James eyed the lab's security system, chirped a warning, cutting her off. Someone had entered the building's outer perimeter. Security breach in Sector 7. The automated system announced. Institute credentials detected. No. James rushed to the security feed. They must have tracked my access to restricted files. We need to delete everything. Naira finished, already moving to the mainframe. Her fingers flew over the controls, erasing weeks of work. I'll handle the data. Get rid of the physical evidence. They moved with desperate efficiency, destroying samples, wiping drives, eliminating every trace of their research. James could hear footsteps in the corridor now, growing closer. The emergency exit, he said, grabbing their most essential files. It leads to the maintenance tunnels. We can. The main door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Dr. Victoria Way, head of Institute Security, stood in the doorway flanked by 2 guards. Her eyes widened at the sight of Naira. Dr. Harrison. Victoria's voice was ice. Care to explain why you're conducting unauthorized research with an alien subject? This isn't what it looks like. James started, then realized how ridiculous that sounded. It was exactly what it looked like. It looks like you're violating about 15 different protocols. Victoria stepped into the lab, her gaze cataloging everything. Unauthorized use of Institute resources, illegal genetic experimentation, collaboration with an unregistered alien entity. My daughter is dying. Naira's voice rang out, her glow intensifying with emotion. Your protocols would have condemned her without even trying to help. That's not our concern. Victoria signaled her guards. The Institute's rules exist for a reason. Dr. Harrison, you're suspended pending investigation. As for you, she turned to Naira. Unauthorized aliens on Institute property are subject to immediate detention and deportation. James stepped between Victoria and Naira. You can't do this. We're close to a breakthrough. The research we've done here could save lives. The research you've done here is illegal. Victoria's expression softened slightly. James, I understand wanting to help, but there are procedures. Submit a proper proposal. Go through channels. There's no time for channels. Naira's hand found James's again, and he felt her trembling. Plea. The transport touched down on a hidden landing pad. Dr. Raina Patel, James's old colleague from university, waited for them in the arrival bay. Her dark eyes widened at the sight of Naira, but she maintained her composure. When you said you needed emergency lab access, you didn't mention bringing Illuminian, Raina said, leading them through security. Though it explains why Institute enforcement agents were asking about you. The less you know about that, the better, James replied. What matters is we need your help. We're working on a cure for the fade. Raina nodded. I figured it out when you requested specific genetic sequencing equipment. I've been studying your research notes since you transmitted them. She glanced at Naira. Your daughter's case is fascinating from a scientific perspective. The way her light cores are failing in sequence rather than simultaneously suggests. She's not a case study, James interrupted sharply. She's a child running out of time. Raina had the grace to look embarrassed. Of course. I'm sorry. The labs are ready. I've allocated you private quarters as well. Level 3, maximum security. Whatever you're running from won't find you here. The facility's labs were state-of-the-art, better even than the Institute's. As they set up their equipment, James noticed Naira's hands trembling as she unpacked their research materials. Hey, he caught her fingers in his. We're safe here. We can work without looking over our shoulders. It's not that. She leaned into him slightly, her glow pulsing with worry. I received a message from Lyra's caretaker. She's stopped responding to the standard treatments entirely. Her primary light core is barely functioning. James felt his heart clench. How long? Days. Maybe a week. A single tear traced down her cheek, glowing like liquid starlight. We're going to lose her, aren't we? Before James could respond, Raina burst into the lab, her dark skin ashen. We have a problem. Institute enforcement just landed. They're with Luminian authorities. What? Naira straightened, her glow flaring with alarm. How did they? They tracked the message to your daughter's caretaker, Raina said grimly. They're demanding I turn you over. Both of you. James moved to the lab console, fingers flying over the controls. How long can you stall them? Maybe 20 minutes. My security clearance lets me lock down sections of the facility, but they'll override it eventually. Raina hesitated. James, they're saying you kidnapped her, that you're conducting illegal experiments on Luminian subjects. That's absurd. Naira protested. I came to him for help. It doesn't matter. James was already gathering their most critical research materials. They're trying to shut us down and destroy any evidence that the Institute refused to help a dying child. We need to. He stopped, staring at the latest test results scrolling across his screen. No, this can't be right. What is it? Naira moved to his side, reading over his shoulder. Her glow brightened suddenly. James, is that the Aurora? He laughed incredulously. The electromagnetic properties in the Aurora are acting as a catalyst, stabilizing the genetic modifications we couldn't get to work before. Raina, your location just gave us our breakthrough. That's wonderful, Raina said tersely, but you have about 18 minutes to use it before you're arrested. James turned to Naira, decision crystallizing. We can synthesize the treatment here. Now. But we'd need a live sample of stable Luminian genetic material to act as a template. Understanding dawned in Naira's silver eyes. Take what you need from me. The process could be dangerous, he warned. In our rush, if something goes wrong. My daughter is dying. Naira was already moving to the medical station. Nothing else matters. The next 15 minutes were a blur of desperate activity. James worked with focused intensity, using Naira's genetic material to stabilize the modified compound. Raina helped while monitoring the approaching security teams. Through it all, Naira lay in the medical scanner, her glow flickering as the process drained her energy. Treatment synthesis complete, the computer announced, just as pounding echoed from the sealed lab doors. This is Institute enforcement. Victoria Way's voice came through the comm. You have 30 seconds to surrender before we breach. James carefully extracted the glowing vial of synthesized treatment. Raina, can you get this to Lyra's caretaker? Raina nodded, taking the vial. I have contacts. I'll make sure it reaches her. Come with us, Naira pleaded, still weak from the extraction. I can't. Raina's smile was sad. Someone needs to make sure the treatment gets delivered. Besides, they already saw me let you in. Running won't help. The pounding on the door grew louder. Metal screamed as they began cutting through. There's a maintenance shaft, Raina said quickly. It leads to an emergency exit near the Northern Lights observation dome. The magnetic interference should cover your escape. She pressed a data crystal into James's hand. Treatment instructions. Now go. James helped Naira to her feet, supporting her as they moved to the hidden exit. Raina, just cure that little girl. She was already moving to the lab console, fingers dancing across controls. I'll wipe the research data. They'll never know how close you came. The maintenance shaft was narrow and cold. James could feel Naira trembling against him, her glow dangerously dim after the extraction process. Behind them, they heard the lab doors finally breach. Almost there, he encouraged, seeing light ahead. They emerged onto an observation platform surrounded by sheets of rippling aurora. The lights painted Naira's pale skin in waves of green and purple, making her look otherworldly. "There's a research vessel," she said weakly, pointing to a small ship docked nearby. "My people's technology. I can fly it." They reached the ship just as alarms began blaring across the facility. As Naira's trembling fingers activated the launch sequence, James caught a glimpse of Victoria's face watching from a window. For a moment, their eyes met, and he saw something like understanding pass across her features. Then they were airborne, rising into the curtain of Aurora Borealis. Naira slumped in the pilot's seat, her energy nearly depleted. "Rest," James said, taking her hand. "I'll watch our course." "If the treatment doesn't work," she began. "It will." He squeezed her fingers gently. "We've come too far to fail now." As Earth fell away below them, James watched the stars emerge. Somewhere out there, a little girl waited, her light fading. But now, finally, they carried hope with them into the darkness. The consequences of their choices would catch up eventually. But for now, they flew through the night, following the starlight home. The Luminian Healing Center floated in low orbit around their homeworld, its crystal spires catching starlight like frozen music. James stood at the observation window of their stolen research vessel, watching the approach. After 4 days of space travel, living in close quarters with Naira, he could no longer pretend his feelings were purely professional. "Security protocols have changed," Naira said from the pilot's seat, her glow still weak from the genetic extraction. "They're expecting us. Can we bypass them?" James moved to stand behind her chair, noting how her luminescence brightened slightly at his proximity. "Not directly." Her fingers danced over the holographic controls. "But I know someone inside. Theron, one of Lyra's original healers. He never agreed with the Council's decision to deny experimental treatments." The comm system crackled to life, displaying a stern-faced Luminian male. "Naira." His expression softened. "By the ancient stars, we thought you'd been kidnapped." "It's complicated, Theron." Naira leaned forward. "We have a treatment for Lyra. Something new. But we need your help to reach her." Theron's glow pulsed with concern. "The authorities are monitoring all incoming vessels. They'd branded your human companion as a dangerous criminal conducting illegal genetic experiments. He's the only one who tried to help when everyone else gave up." Naira's hand found James's, sending that familiar spark between them. "Please, Theron. Lyra's time is running out." The healer studied them for a long moment, his glow shifting through patterns James had learned to recognize as deep thought. "Dock at Maintenance Bay 7. I'll encrypt your signature as a supply delivery. But hurry. Lyra's condition has deteriorated significantly." The next hour was a blur of careful maneuvering and tense moments passing security. Theron met them in a deserted corridor, his tall form radiating concern. "She's fully comatose," he reported as they hurried through the crystal halls. "Her light cores are failing in sequence. We've had to place her in stasis to slow the progression." James clutched the case containing their synthesized treatment. "How long has she been under?" 3 days. Any longer, and the damage becomes irreversible." Theron paused outside a sealed door. "She's in here. But you should prepare yourselves." Nothing could have prepared James for the sight of Lyra in person. The holographic images hadn't captured how small she looked in the stasis pod, how dim her once bright glow had become. Patches of her skin were completely dark, like gaps in a starfield. Naira made a soft, broken sound and rushed to the pod. "My little starlight," she whispered, pressing her hand to the crystal surface. "I'm here. We're going to make you better." James forced himself to focus on the medical readouts. "Her core degradation is accelerating. If we're going to do this, it has to be now." He turned to Theron. "We'll need to take her out of stasis. The shock could kill her," Theron warned. "She's dying anyway," Naira said quietly, not taking her eyes off Lyra. "We have to try." The next few hours were the most intense of James's life. They worked with precise desperation, carefully administering the treatment while monitoring Lyra's failing systems. Naira never left her daughter's side, singing soft Luminian lullabies as they waited for any sign of improvement. "Look," Theron suddenly pointed to one of the monitors. "Her secondary cores are stabilizing. The treatment is—" Warning klaxons cut him off. "Alert," an automated voice announced. "Unauthorized genetic procedure detected in Healing Ward 7. Security teams en route." "No," Naira breathed. "Not when we're so close." "How long until the treatment fully integrates?" James demanded. Theron checked the readings. 20 minutes minimum, but security will be here in 5. "Then we'll give her 20 minutes. James moved to the door controls, sealing them in. "Whatever it takes." Naira looked up from Lyra, her silver eyes wide. "James, no. They'll arrest you. After everything Earth's authorities already. Some things are worth the risk." He met her gaze steadily. "You taught me that." The next 15 minutes were a symphony of tension. Security teams pounded on the doors while they watched Lyra's readings, praying the treatment would take hold. James used every override code he knew to slow them down, but they were running out of time. Then, like dawn breaking, Lyra's glow began to strengthen. Color returned to her dark patches, and her light cores pulsed with renewed energy. "It's working," Theron breathed, checking and rechecking the data. "Her genetic structure is stabilizing. The treatment, it's actually working." Naira sobbed with relief, pressing her forehead to her daughter's pod. Outside, they could hear cutting tools beginning to breach the door. 5 more minutes, James said, watching the final treatment readings. "That's all we need." But they didn't have 5 minutes. The door burst inward, and armed security forces swarmed the room. James found himself face to face with a Luminian official whose glow radiated authority. "Dr. James Harrison," the official intoned. "You are under arrest for unauthorized genetic experimentation, kidnapping, and violation of interstellar medical protocols." "Wait." Theron stepped forward. "Look at the readings. The treatment was successful. The child will live." The official wavered, studying the medical displays. "That's impossible. The fade has never been cured." "Because no one was willing to break protocols to find the cure," James said quietly. "Sometimes rules need to be broken for the right reasons." A small sound from the medical pod drew everyone's attention. Lyra's eyes fluttered open, her glow bright and steady for the first time in months. "Mama," she whispered. The armed guards lowered their weapons as Naira rushed to embrace her daughter. The official stared at the reunion, then at the medical readings showing Lyra's complete recovery. "The council will need to review this," he said finally. "All of it. Until then," he gestured to his guards. "Take the human into custody." Gently, he added, seeing Naira's expression. His crimes may have had mitigating circumstances. As they led him away, James caught one last glimpse of Naira holding Lyra. Both of them glowed with healthy light, their patterns synchronized in joy. The sight made everything, his ruined career, his uncertain future, all of it, worth it. But in the moment before the doors closed, Naira's eyes met his. In that look was everything they hadn't had time to say, everything that had grown between them during their desperate journey. And James knew, whatever happened next, their story wasn't over. Through the window of his holding cell, he could see the stars scattered across space, like hope made visible. Somewhere out there, a little girl was dancing again, her light restored. Sometimes, he reflected, the most important chemistry wasn't found in a lab at all. Head of Genetic Research's new Cross-Protocol Innovation Division, Naira mused. "Quite a title." "I was thinking of shortening it to the Hope Division," James replied. "Since that's what we're really offering. Hope for cases that seem hopeless. Like a desperate mother willing to do anything to save her child." Naira's glow shimmered with amusement. "Exactly like that." He touched her cheek gently. "Though I have to admit, I never expected anything to lead here. The best discoveries are often unexpected." She pulled him closer, her luminescence synchronizing with his body's electrical field in a way that still fascinated him. Speaking of discoveries, Lyra has been experimenting with combining human and Luminian music. She says it helps her understand both sides of her new family. They watched as Lyra coaxed harmonious light patterns from the garden's crystals, creating a melody that bridged their two worlds. Other children had gathered to watch, both human and Luminian, their differences forgotten in shared wonder. "We're going to change everything, aren't we?" James murmured. "We already have." Naira kissed him softly, their combined glow creating new patterns of possibility. This is just the beginning. Above them, Earth and the Luminian homeworld shared the sky, 2 points of light in the vast dark. Between them, in a garden where flowers sang with starlight, a family born of desperation and hope looked toward a future bright with promise. Sometimes, they had learned, the greatest breakthroughs come not from following the expected path, but from having the courage to forge a new one entirely.